Hello everyone, welcome back to the course on Health Humanities, Indian and Western Medical Knowledge Traditions. This is lecture number 34 on aging and literature. In this lecture, I will talk about how aging is and aging involves biological, psychological and social dimensions. And then I'll explore these dimensions through the help of literature, through the help of novels, poetry, drama, and how literature talks about the degradation of the old age people and how their health declines, how their mind declines, and how society restricts the movements, the roles, and social positions of the people who are old. I'll further talk about aging as a universal, multifaceted process and attitude towards aging which varies, which differs across culture, across traditions, across societies. So the purpose over here is to bring how aging is not unilateral, one-dimensional notion, rather how there are multiple points of view, multiple narratives that construct and legitimate their views about old age people, about aging. Then I will talk about how there are certain theories, certain critical approaches which can also be used in studying aging, and this is called critical gerontology. The idea behind critical gerontology is to critique and to challenge the structural inequalities in the aging. And in this regard, it brings the theories of gender, race, marginalization, post-colonialism, post-structuralism, and other theories, and critiques, challenges the binaries of, or maybe the notions of normalcy. Further, the involvement of humanistic gerontology emphasizes that meaning making and personal narratives are essential and significant in the development of the aging narratives. It will produce an alternative ways through which aging can be understood and described. Further, aging is influenced by personal, individual, societal, and global factors, which means that aging is not just individual biological problems. Rather, aging is constructed through society, through global consumeristic factors, and it shapes the notions behind one's understanding of the people who are becoming old. With the rise of life expectancy, with the rise of one's span of time, the number of people who are getting old gets increased, and then in the society we have a, a large number of people who are becoming old, and there are countries which have been now described that they have the largest number of old age people, and the countries which are now seen as to have the youngest population, maybe after a point of time that country will also be having the largest number of the people who belong to the old age. When we go about biological and social aspect of aging, we find that in the biological sense, aging is gradual physical decline. It is the decline of health, decline of strength, decline of eye vision, decline of hearing capacity, and decline of the power of senses. So it is called gradual physical decline and cellular damage, damage to the cells of the body. And aging can be seen in two ways. One is called primary aging, which is called natural. that one is becoming old with the passage of time and one cannot stop it. And other one is secondary aging, which can be prevented and stopped for a point of time, because this happens due to the lack of certain health concerns, due to the lack of certain crisis caused by some disease in the body. And hence aging is something natural which is not stoppable. However, the anti-aging approach can be used, and a person can maintain one's health for a longer point of time. However, the secondary aging can be cured and prevented. And when we think about the health of the people who belong to the old age, their health, their life can be saved by the kind of behaviors, the kind of social structures they are put in, and the kind of the kind of resources which they are having access to. And then we find that the the prevalent inequalities in the society also shapes one's condition of health. And these conditions of health include uh, the problems which can be avoidable, because these problems are caused by social hardships. They are also part of contingent aging. The existential aging refers to the universal human vulnerabilities. And in this regard, a person is having his or her existential crisis, and he is unable to lead uh, the life which the person is willing to pursue. And this existential crisis of identity is common to most of the countries, most of the culture and traditions. It is not unique and particular to one particular culture and tradition, because in most of the societies, the people who become old, they are neglected, they are not given enough importance, they become vulnerable, and they become prone to different diseases. Hence, to understand aging, one has to understand the interplay of body, identity, and the social structures that defines one's experience. So, aging is not just biological, not just social or cultural, rather it is the interplay, it is about the intersectionality of body, identity, and social structure, which constructs and creates one's experiences of old age. We also find that the genetic and environmental factors interact in biological aging. So, the environmental factors, the environmental conditions also affect how a person remains young for a long time, or there are certain genetic disorders that can make a person grow old very soon. In this way, we find that aging is both biological as well as social, and they come together to formulate the concept of ageism, which is about the negative perspectives, the stereotypes, and cultural discourse, the negative cultural discourses about the old age people. When we think about the health and health conditions of the old age people, then we find that the old people are often at the risk of chronic diseases, and aging also increases these chronic diseases. And The condition of health in the old people in the older age are determined by the kind of lifestyle, the kind of food which they had. So the lifelong behavior of the person will determine one's condition in the older age. It will determine one's health condition once they become old. There are some people who associate disability with aging, that once a person becomes old, he or she becomes disabled because the person is not able to carry out his routine activities or any other kind of work. However, disability is a separate domain, separate field, and it is not synonymous with aging. When we look at the need for healthcare facilities, healthcare becomes very critical and important in the later life because a person often needs the support of healthcare facilities. The person often needs the medical aids which can prevent the disease one is having and can make a person active and promote healthy aging. So we find that illness and disease, even chronic diseases, are often seen to be the important factors in the old age or in the older people. It affects their day-to-day activities, their thinking, their ideas, and their existence. When we look at the representation of aging and illness, one of the earliest example is by Horace, and he writes about the old age man in one of his poems, where he says about the problems of the old age. Horace says, many ills encompass an old man, whether because he seeks gain and then miserably holds aloof from his store and fears to use it, because in all that he does, he lacks fire and courage, is dilatory and slow to form hopes, is sluggish and greedy of a longer life. Peevish, surly, given to praising the days he spent as a boy, and to reproving and condemning the young. So Horace in the very beginning emphasizes that the old age, the old man encompasses many ills, many diseases, that the old man is someone who will be having a lot of health concerns, health problems, diseases and ills, and whether because he seeks gain and then miserably holds aloof from his store and fears to use it. And this disease can be that the person is trying to achieve something higher but he couldn't achieve so. Horace also says that the old man or a person in the old age lacks the innate heat, lacks the fire and courage, which means a person in the old age becomes weak, becomes servile, and he hardly is able to manage his own life. So weakness, lack of fire, lack of courage, and uh, he has less hope as well. So it is not just a physical condition, it also affects one's psychological condition. The man or the old person loses his hope, though he or she may have a desire for a long life, and then the person will think and indulge in nostalgia and remember about the time which he has spent as a boy. So in this way, literature tries to actually reveal that how the ancient societies have considered old men as as people who are having illnesses or who lacks courage, who lacks of energy, who lack fire, and who have desires to remain young, but they cannot do so. When we look about the representation of old man in Shakespeare's Macbeth, Macbeth says, life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. And in this way, Macbeth emphasizes, or Shakespeare emphasizes, that our life, our existence is just a shadow, and the roles we perform is just like simple role. I mean, human beings are poor players on the stage, and once their time gets over, the role will end. They won't be heard anymore, which means a Macbeth is emphasizing that death is the closure for everything. Death closes all. Death stops everything. So when one's time ends, the person will not have any other activities. He will be simply dead. He cannot perform anything else. He says that whether a person can think about his adventures, his glorious deeds, however, it will be in the entire like scenario a kind of tale full of sound and fury, but it has no meaning, no significance. It's a tale told by an idiot, which doesn't signify anything. So whether it's Horace or Shakespeare's Macbeth, they present, they compare old age with illness, or old age where the time is going to end and person will be dying. When we look at the psychological aspect of aging, we find that the psychological approach to aging reveals a person may have loss of memory, loss of cognitive powers. Though this loss of memory and cognitive power may differ in individual to individual. So this loss of memory and the power will determine one's existence in the society. However, they can manage their life in different way, and though they may have loss of memory, but they can find out the ways of meaning making of their remaining part of life. And this idea of meaning making is crucial for one's well-being in the later life. So meaning making, how one can indulge in meaning making? They can indulge in meaning making by indulging them in some meaningful works, like in terms of reading, in terms of traveling, in terms of like putting their time in spirituality, or guiding the people who seek knowledge. So there are multiple ways through which one can devote and develop the a time which can lead to the active and healthy aging. Though loss, illness, and transitions requires emotional adaptations, a person may have the loss of memory, have a loss of health, can get illness. It will be difficult for him or her to cope with this, to cope with these problems. However, they can deal with these problems with the passage of time, and hence the psychological aspects focuses on that how a person can maintain one's autonomy, one's self-worth, and remain active to promote and to fulfill the psychological needs. The cognitive change in the person's mind includes the loss of memory, the loss of the processing of information, the loss of the speed of the processing of information, and hence a person may not uh, do and carry forward his activities as they used to do earlier. When we think about how this loss of memory has been dealt in literature, one of the earliest example is when we look at this in Shakespeare's Tempest, where Prospero says, "Sir, I am vexed. Bear with my weakness. My old brain is troubled. Be not disturbed with my infirmity." So over here, Prospero says that like he has become old, and with his old age, with his age, his brain is troubled. His mind has become weak. He may not have the memory which he used to have. He can forget things. He may have dementia. He may have some other kind of concerns. So we find over here how the concerns of brain being troubled, the brain being weak, is part of psychological aspect of aging, and Shakespeare has talked about this. And how to make a meaning of one's existence in the old age, and what is the purpose of like making meaning, how one can like make their life meaningful. So meaning making helps one to prevent life from being fragmented. What happens when a person becomes old? He may find herself or himself to be isolated, alone, bored, and having no purpose, no aim in the life, and that makes their existence more troublesome. So to avoid this troublesome, one has to look for the meaning of his existence and how one can contribute in the meaning making. And so one has to find out the purpose of one's existence, one's life, the worth of one's life, the efficacy and value of one's life, how they can contribute, how they can do certain things in their own terms, at their own time and place. And in this way, we find that old people can make their life, their existence meaningful. The problem also happens that the people who are young, they do not think much about the old age. They think that they will remain forever young, and they do not manage their life. They do not prepare themselves for the old age, and so their life is wasted, that they will forever remain young, and suddenly once they enter in the old age, they find that for them the situation has become difficult to manage, to adapt. And in this way, the older people need to reflect on their legacy and personal narratives, which can help the other older people, which can help the younger generations as well, and that they can derive some ideas. So in this way, one has to think about one's old age, not only when one comes or when one attains the old age, but from the younger life itself, and plan their old age accordingly. And in this way, it can actually help them to deal with their existential crisis. And one of the like very common methods and approaches for the old age people are that they can be part of spiritual activities. They can carry forward the legacy of ethical works, or they actually promote and inculcate ethical values in the later part of their life, and they can help the other people with some good and ethical tasks and values and suggestions. Further, like though like a person tries to make one's life meaningful and significant the way they want. However, there are people who suffer from dementia, from forgetting in the old age. However, dementia and forgetfulness are not just biomedical, it is also psychological. And one has to examine and assess the dementia from the person-centered care. So there cannot be like one general theory of curing dementia, and it can be applied to all the people without any kind of discrimination. One needs to actually look at the concerns, the problems of each person, and then apply the individual centered dementia care. And further, the people who have dementia, it is not just their what you call biomedical problem or psychological problem, it is also a social problem, because the person who are having dementia, they face social stigma, they get excluded from the public participation, from their roles in the public. So the idea of stigma, the idea of shame are very essential to understand the people who are having dementia, and see how dementia is not just individual medical or biomedical problem, it is psychological because it affects one's mind. It is also social because society discriminates, excludes from their roles in the society. And to deal with the dementia, one has to develop empathy, narrative, and social inclusion. Other the people who are demented, they must be seen as the part of the society. And the human rights must include people with cognitive decline, because the people who are like getting dementia or whose cognitive powers are declining, they need special attention, they need special care. And in this regard, one must think about the human rights of the people who are having dementia. So the concerns of the old age is having how people actually suffer from several problems, and that can affect their body, their mind, their memory, and their capacity of remembering certain things. And when we look at the people who are old and the kind of problem they face, and most of the problem of such people are social, and one needs to think in terms of critical gerontology, because critical gerontology is something which will emphasize how one can look at the social conditions, the personal conditions, the familial conditions, the social structures, the economic conditions, and so many different conditions that shapes and constructs one's existence, one's life in the society. So critical gerontology are very essential to understand the social dimensions of aging. One has to actually look at one's income, whether one is sufficient money to survive in the old age, whether one is having enough income that they can take care of their health concerns. The second issue arises, does the old man is having a house, a room of his own, where he can stay and spend time meaningfully, or they have been thrown out of the house. One needs to think about like whether they have sufficient money, income, they are having shelter and housing, and what are the available resources for taking care of their health. In this way, we find that the people who are old Despite all kind of claims which the policymaker can make, they face a lot of problems, and these problems can be in terms of income, in terms of housing, in terms of care. And the older people need compassionate aging, they need protection from exclusion, they need to be the part of the mainstream society. So the idea of compassionate aging is very necessary, and with compassionate aging, one needs to have sufficient income to maintain one's needs a shelter to stay, needs the facilities to take care of their illnesses. Further, the class to which a person belongs, the gender to which a person belongs, also affects one's experiences of aging. And one has to also look at the global policies which actually address the structural barriers and at the same time also create the structural barriers for the old age people. So aging is not something just biological and individual. It is caused by social structures, social inequalities, where the people who are young, they have all the resources, and those who are old and belong to the poor strata of society may not have so much resources. And if they have a little resources, that can also be shaped by their day-to-day experiences, the kind of discrimination that they face. Simone de Beauvoir, in her book The Coming of Age, writes that how old age was shaped in the Western culture and how old age is represented negatively. Simone de Beauvoir says that in order to prevent that old age becomes a ridiculous travesty of our previous life, there is only one possibility: to pursue a goal that gives meaning to our life, to devote oneself to people, groups of people, and activity, social, political, intellectual, creative work. It is to be hoped, and this goes right against the advice of the moralists, that our passions remain sufficiently strong at an older age to prevent that we turn inward. So Simone de Beauvoir says that a person that there needs to be mechanism, laws, social policies which can prevent the older people to become ridiculous. And there are then Simone de Beauvoir further says that one has to actually devote one's time to make one's existence meaningful, and they can devote their time to the people, to the groups of people. They can be part of certain activities which can be social, political, intellectual, or creative, and in this way they can spend their time meaningfully. And she further says that the people need to remain sufficiently strong at an older age, because if they do not remain strong, it may affect their health. When we go further, and then we find how this kind of social discriminations have been so much prevalent in the society. The persistence of gerontophobia are very much part of our society. In Shakespeare's King Lear, we find how gerontophobia has been directed in the text, in the play. This is the conversation between Goneril and Regan, and they talk about the old age of King Lear and what they think about King Lear. Goneril says, "You see how full of changes his age is. The observation we have made of it hath not been little. He always loved our sisters most, and with what poor judgment he hath now cast her off appears too grossly." Goneril says that like how much time he has spent, how much he likes his sister, I mean the sister of Goneril, called Cordelia. So Goneril talks about that Lear loves and likes his daughter Cordelia, and how it has affected, how it has brought some kind of changes to his age. Then Regan says, "It is the infirmity of his age, yet he has ever but slenderly known himself." This is basically disparaging the old age people, and it is also insulting the people who are old. Both Goneril and Regan have a phobia for the people who are old, or phobia for King Lear. Goneril further says, "The best and soundest of his time hath been but race. Then must we look from his age to receive not alone the imperfections of long engraft condition, but their vital the unruly waywardness that infirm and choleric years brings with them." Then Regan responds, "Such unconstant starts are we like to have from him as this of Kant's banishment." So both Goneril and Regan actually hate, and it reveals that how they are having phobia, how they are having very negative perspective about King Lear's old age. They associate his old age with his desires, with his expectations, and in a negative manner. When we come to the modern age, and we find like how modern identities have been part of aging, and particularly late modernity demands a self-reflexive lifestyle. So it says like in the time of consumerism, in the time of consumerist society, aging has been managed through self-reflexive lifestyles. One can also think about like writing, composing one's life experiences, and it can be called like choice biography, and it will help to organize one's life course paths. And in this way, aging also our old age will also help in improving the one's self direction of one's goal. Further, in the modern time, we find that the idea of autonomy, the idea of self-care are central, that every person should have freedom to do what they want. They should have a time for self-care. Michel Foucault has talked about the care of self. And personal growth is something which are essential for the later stage of life. The people who belong to old age, they can also spend their time in spiritual activities, and this will lead to ethical aging. And because aging prompts reflections on mortality and meaning. So once a person becomes old, they will be suddenly made aware that they will be dying soon, and hence they can spend their time in the spiritual activities, in the meaningful existence. And these spiritual traditions will provide a framework for the late life, for the old age people, where they can also think about the ethics of self-care, which Foucault describes in terms of autonomy, freedom, and identity. The ethics of care also focuses on relational living, where one is surviving, one is existing based upon the task one is doing, and they make their life, their existence meaningful. So in this way, the ethical virtue, ethical actions, the moral actions become very necessary and significant in the spiritual active aging. The condition of woman differ from the condition of old age man. Though sometimes old people are defined and portrayed as sexless people, identityless people, however, the women face more problems. Women face in their old age a layer of discrimination. They may be having problems because of the patriarchal systems. Then they'll be also having the problem of age. So their problems become double. So the problems of patriarchy, the problems of old age, and then suppose they belong to the colonial nations, then the problem of what you call colonization will be also there. However, there are certain historical views which dismisses these ideas of female aging. They think that women live longer than a male, longer than the men. However, in the old days, women also need autonomy. They need the time for themselves. They need freedom for themselves, because once like a woman becomes old, they need to reflect over their life. They need to organize their activities. They need to do something meaningful. So these gender roles also affects the condition of older men. And the women are also poor in the Indian context. They do not own any property, any wealth, and hence they have less access to the medical facilities. We also find that the problem of older women are invisible, and any representation of the problems of older women are full of biases, full of discriminations. Very few people may be aware about the conditions of older women. We need to think about that the agency in the late life of old people, and we find that the older adults, the older people are often denied their full agency. They are not given the sense of their self, the sense of their identity, and hence this agency will be quiet, passive, and relational. The person may not speak up, may not actually follow what they want. They may be dependent upon other people. However, their dependency may not be the lack of their choice, the absence of their experiences. We further need interpretive gerontology, which can value the lived experiences of the old people. And this interpretive gerontology can be further developed and advanced by the policy and different social organizations, different social roles. It will help a person develop one's lifestyle in a better manner. When we think about like how technology can help in the life of older people, and we find that technology provides independence and freedom to the old age people. And with the help of technology and with the help of social support, the people who are old, they will not be institutionalized. They will not be the object of study, the object of gaze. We also need to rethink about the environmental conditions, the geographical conditions, the architectural conditions that actually affect one's well-being, and also designs how one can grow in the old age. And these like what you call the environmental concerns are the concerns of technology and social support are very necessary, and it helps one to combat social isolation. And one can further think about that the community participation is very necessary in the old age. I will talk about this community participation in the next lecture. And then these like what you call community participation or healthy aging is something very necessary. The healthy aging or positive aging are defined as are defined by well-being, one's like health conditions, one's purpose and aim in life, one's engagement and roles in the society, one's engagement and roles in the family. So positive aging, active aging, healthy aging involves well-being, purpose and aim in life, engagement in social, cultural, personal, religious activities. The positive aging talks about that the old age is not the absence of decline, but one adapts one's decline and is still able to continue and promote one's life. Positive aging is concerned about how one can develop satisfaction and control over one's life, how they can participate in one's life, and then do some meaningful work. So positive aging talks about resilience and spiritual and psychological growth as long as it is possible. So resilience, spirituality and psychological growth are essential for positive aging. When we think about the people who are old, they suffer from dementia. However, dementia is not just biological. Dementia also shapes one's social citizenship. It shapes one's existence in the society. So dementia is not just the inner condition of one's mind, it is also the social condition through which one defines one's identity. So despite like a person who is having dementia, the task of the government policies is to maintain and preserve the personhood of the person. Dementia also needs to think from the social perspective, cultural perspective, not just from the medical perspective. And one has to listen the narratives of the people, the stories of the people who are having dementia. It will transform their public perception, it will transform their points of view. And the social environment also must adapt to diverse fields, diverse needs. One has then to talk about the cultural imaginaries of aging, or how aging has been perceived and formulated through cultures. We find different cultural metaphors that shape aging identities. That, for example, like the cunning old man, the greedy old man. So these are like cultural metaphors. Or maybe in the case of what you call Charles Dickens's Oliver Twist, the evil old man. So these are like certain metaphors, certain phrases, certain way of language that shapes one's experiences and one's identity of aging. So aging has also been seen in some sense the second youth, or the inevitable decline from the health, from one's physical conditions. When we look at media, when we look at art, literature, philosophy, they depict old age sometimes in a reductive way, or sometimes they can provide an alternative methods. So we have different ways through which culture, literature, arts and media create the perceptions and understanding of old age people. And to move towards the good old age, one has to think about the ethical aging, which means that one is having a dignity, agency and inclusion in the society. The good old age must support the structures and which can align with their needs. They need to actually they need to have what continued contribution even if they are in the older age. However, like what is good old age and what is bad old age, they are like socially and personally constructed. They are not like given out there. It is the society, the discourse which makes their understanding, their formulations about the old age. And so we find that aging has both negative, declining aspect as well as positive aspects, healthy aging, active aging. And I have given some references of the negative aging, the declining aging. This is an example of positive and healthy or active aging from Tennyson's Ulysses. This poem is about uh, Ulysses who has come to his home after winning multiple wars, after staying outside. He has become old, but he finds that he still has time to do some work. And how one can make one's life meaningful, how one can add meaning, purpose to one's life. This poem can give some idea about active, healthy, and positive aging, where a person can like manage one's life, provide some kind of goal, some kind of aim, some kind of purpose to one's existence. And Tennyson says, old age hath yet his honor and his toil. So old age has its own honor, its own hardships. Tennyson accepts that old age has certain virtues and certain hardships, but death closes all. Death is the end of everything. But something ere the need, some work of noble note may yet be done. So old age has its own dignity, its own honor, its own hardships. Death will close everything, will end everything. But before death comes, some noble work can be done. This time yet to do some noble work. And then Ulysses invokes his friends. Ulysses invokes his other sailors, other members in the boat. Come, my friends, it is not too late to seek a newer world. Which means that it is not too late to go and explore a new place, a new country. And all one can actually go on like having some kind of trip, some kind of what do you call it, tourism to enrich one's knowledge. It's not too late to seek a newer world, to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of the all western stars until I die. And then Ulysses says that there is time to sail beyond the sunset. That I mean, one has to move beyond the horizons, to move beyond where one can, like, what one is seeing or what one believes in. Before, like, one dies, one has to do these works. Though much is taken, much abides, and though we are not now that strength which in old age moved earth and heaven, that which we are one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. And the ultimate aim of old age, The ultimate purpose and goal of old age is to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Not to yield the social categorization, not to yield to the curtailment of one's liberty, one's rights, or designating old person as weak and poor in health. Rather, an old man can strive to gain knowledge, can strive to explore the new world, can gain knowledge, can seek knowledge, he can find something, and he will not accept any kind of narratives which will demean the old people, which will curtail and limit the rights of the old age people. So to conclude, aging in literature as well as in theory has been seen to have both social, cultural, structural, and personal concerns. So aging is both structural, personal. In structural, it includes social and ethical, moral, and many other aspects, and it creates a different perspective and point of view about the old age people. We further need to think about how different policies talk about the complexity and diversity of the old age, and how they can be, how literature can be used to reflect over the policies, to rewrite the policies. We need to think about the rights of the old people and consider that the elders are citizens, not the dependents, which most societies consider that they are dependent. We have to consider them that they are like any other citizen, whether young or adult. We need to provide the critical humanistic point of view, that we need to think and approach and have the sense of care for the old age people. In this way, aging requires collective and individual approach, which will help to manage one's old age process. Thank you.